Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of big data. Today my guests are from Fujifilm. We have Dan Greenberg and Teig Lynster. Gentlemen, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on. What I thought we'd do is, since we haven't spoken to Fuji for a while, is get an overview of your Dternity product, and then we'll follow that with Q&A.
Sounds great. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about Dternity. In essence, what is Dternity? Dternity is Fujifilm's new deep storage solution. We took a hard look at archiving and how it's been done recently, and we decided to come up with a truly holistic approach that really relied on three core factors. And that's the archive-grade tape media that we have been innovating for over the past 2 decades, combined with on-site NAS storage that has built-in data protection, and online vaulting that features 24/7 portal access and retrieval. We're really excited about this. We're going to be launching it on March 12th, 2014. So now that you know what Dternity is, we really want to take a look at why Dternity came to being. And so moving on, we're looking at, archiving really makes sense. We feature, massive unstructured data growth is going through the roof in the next decade, with data going into the exabytes in coming years. But moving on, we took a look and saw that archiving as it's existed recently doesn't really work. Data preservation has become too expensive and convoluted. A lot of organizations utilize various software platforms and hardware implementations that really don't play well together and feature, they have poor integration with offsite data protection options. Also, we found that a lot of archiving implementations today rely on proprietary software that puts your data really out of arm's reach. We thought about that man who used to work on the end of the floor, who knew how to speak tape's language, and was the only person who really knew how to communicate with the archive. And, all of these reasons have basically made archiving less of a priority for businesses moving forward.
So let's dig into the 3 different components of Dternity. What we've done here really is we've approached archiving and data preservation from the perspective of, a tape media manufacturer. And the goal here is to make tape incredibly simple to use. Now, you don't have to know how to use it in order to move files and project content onto it to be preserved. And there's really 3 pillars to our Dternity solution. It's the archive-grade media that we manufacture, as well as the Dternity NAS, which is the system that allows you to present a library of tape on your local network and interact with it just like any other network-attached storage. And also, what's really special is that our Fujifilm facilities, we're hosting the Dternity Media Cloud so that you can send file content to us online, as well as create, on-site, off-site protection scenarios so that you can achieve multi-copy, multi-site protection. Moving on to the archive, Dternity archive media. Well, this is really not really any different than the LTO6 media we manufacture today. The real key here, though, is that we're utilizing barium ferrite technology, which is Fujifilm's innovative nanotech that we use to achieve incredibly high densities today and now in the future. We've demonstrated with IBM the ability to put 35 terabytes on a single cartridge. And in general, the stability of this particular formulation really allows us to achieve incredibly high shelf life. So it's kind of like the Kobe beef of media, and it serves as a great platform to preserve content on. But like we were hinting at before, the uniqueness now in leveraging tape. Tape has always, on paper had this low cost per gigabyte or the lowest cost per gigabyte. However, to leverage it, it's always been hidden behind some sort of proprietary workflow. And this is where the Dternity NAS comes into play. With this appliance, with this server, you can control a library and basically turn a library of media into a big, seamless file system. And now you can present that on your network. You can create shares like any other network-attached storage and use the same sort of file-based workflow that all 99% of the applications out there use to move content onto it. And what's really special is normally you would have, when you have network attached storage, in order to protect it, you would stand up another instance of it for either failover, or you're going to be replicating to it, or maybe you have a backup process that you're using to protect the content on it. This appliance has additional smarts, again, to enable its archive tier-like functionality where, based on policy, when you move files into a share, you could have a policy set up that file turns into 2 copies on 2 individual pieces of media, and therefore you can self-heal and do all kinds of really cool N-factor type protection. Now, again, the goal here is to take it out of the proprietary backup environment and put it right on the network and interact with it just like you would disk or flash for any other network attached storage. This particular solution supports both CIFS and NFS, so really anything that can move content to a share backed by one of those protocols can now interact directly with tape. So I have an illustration here of the old way of utilizing and leveraging tape. And I want to talk specifically about some of the challenges in preserving content within this architecture. So really, you start off with all of these brands that you see here that make up your application environment, and when you were leveraging tape, it would often be behind a backup server or the backup process. Now, if you're using backup to archive or to accomplish or to preserve data, it's a hard architecture to scale, and that's because if you have fixed content that you're protecting and it ends up part of a backup process, one is, well, you get a lot of backup bloat, of course, because your archive or your backup window is extra long because you have it filled up with content that's not changing. And so, in addition, you have it part of a backup process, which is technically offline, maybe it's nearline, depending on the systems you have. And as a result, you've given up some of the immediate accessibility that you're used to with network attached storage. So you end up scaling your large volume disk as well as scaling back. It's just an expensive architecture to scale. So the new way, moving on, is really, like I said, taking tape now and being able to leverage it within the same workflow that you leverage your other network storage in. And so essentially, you can now move content to this Dternity tier on the network, supporting the same protocols that you use to move content from share to share, and take that content and put it on this incredibly cost-effective tier that provides built-in data protection, and you're not giving up the accessibility. Like I said, this thing presents a persistent file system onto your network. All the content you're moving into this shows up in a seamless file system. All of the tape technology is completely invisible behind the scenes. Moving on to the key components of the Dternity NAS. This is where you could see that this is more than just taking or putting another file system on top of tape. Like I said, this is targeted for data preservation, and so we have a lot of the functionality that you need to use to enable that. We have data integrity, tamper checking, for redundancy. We have multi-copy policies, over-the-wire replication, self-healing. This thing will plug into your Active Directory to support role-based access. Most importantly, though, is we are leveraging LTFS technology, and this is an open standard that supports a file-based access to tape. Now, the way that we're using it is incredibly special here. Most systems say they will support LTFS as an export method. However, LTFS is the building block around this entire file system that we have here. So really, when content is moved into the Dternity NAS, we are not packaging it, wrapping it in any sort of proprietary fashion, the file actually ends up unadulterated on a piece of media on LTFS as is defined by the LTFS consortium. So again, the goal here was to take out all of that middleware, all that complexity associated with talking and writing the tape, so that when you move content onto it, first of all, you have that ease of file-based workflow, okay? But also all of that middleware doesn't have to be carried forward in the future just to get access to the files. Because let's face it, customers already have enough of a challenge in managing their applications and versions of that. Now, I'd like to start talking about the Dternity Media Cloud. This is, again, very unique to Fujifilm, and you probably wonder why Fujifilm hasn't created this, why it's taken us so long to create this, because it makes a lot of sense. What we're doing is we're taking the technology, the architecture that we just described, and we're hosting it inside of our factories and other facilities and presenting this as a deep storage service for files and projects. So essentially, you can move content to us, files and projects over the wire, and they end up on our media, and we preserve and protect that content. Now, this can be used as part of an on-site, off-site strategy to achieve multi-copy, multi-site, as well as used independently like any other online file service. In addition, we do have disaster recovery-like functionality so that if, for example, the power went out at the office and you needed to access this service independently, we do have a portal where you can go in and see your entire directory structure of all the content that you have stored here, regardless of whether you're moving it online or using some sort of physical shuttle tape or disk or whatever. All that content ends up on a persistent file system that we manage for you. So again, let's take a look at the old way and the new way, right? So the old way of achieving offsite protection with tape is well, you'd cut another copy either through a backup process or just a second copy, and you would move that offsite to a vault, and it's tape on a shelf. Tape on a shelf is really cost effective, really cheap. However, there are issues with it, right? It's sitting on a shelf, and as time goes on, things change. A lot of that proprietary software, like the backup app, change from version to version, and if you needed to retrieve a file through this process, well, first of all, you're managing tape, so you're pulling a tape, and then you're going to have to more than likely go through a recovery process. So it gets really messy, especially as you scale this out. It can be very difficult to manage. So the new file-based way is what's happening here with Dternity. And so in this illustration here, I'm showing the Dternity NAS replicating to the Dternity Media Cloud. So you have your on-site storage seamlessly creating a second copy in the Media Cloud, perhaps for data protection, right, a second copy. What's really interesting is if you look at the cloud itself here, you'll see that there's a little process, a little cycle here, migration and health. And this is where we do things very differently. So when content is moved into our Media Cloud, yeah, it ends up on our tape. However, even if that tape was on the shelf, and let's say you haven't accessed it in a long time, your content enters into a cycle where we are independently, even if you don't access that content, we are monitoring its health. We have the facilities and hardware to migrate that content from a generation to two generations, further, if that makes sense for you. But basically, the goal here is we're coming from the other end of the spectrum of preserving, protecting content. And our goal here is to really push the economics around archiving, to make it as incredibly cost-effective as possible, for people that have real big data issues here. So, in addition to using both the on-site and off-site Media Cloud in tangent, you can use the Media Cloud separately. by itself. So you can mount it like any other online file system, and whatever data mover you have, you could either copy content over or ship it directly into the cloud. So let's move on to key components. So Fujifilm started its services business. Really, we cut our teeth in hosting and protecting PACS imaging, which is the medical archive image format, and that's because Fujifilm Medical is one of the largest PACS software vendors, and as a service, they provide their hospital customers with DR and data protection services. And that is, in fact, something that we run for them. And as a result, we are HIPAA high-tech compliance, and so we're very good stewards of content. It's kind of something you need to bring to the table anyway when you're in this business. What's very interesting, though, again, is the flexibility we have from an SLA perspective, and by that I mean you can really push the cost curve of archiving online and not give up that file-based interactivity that makes it very easy to recall data. And we support a number of different SLAs where if you need to bubble up content to more active environments, and we can do that. But again, you're not managing tape, and really this is very simple to use, and it makes the preserving of file and project-based content really easy. I'd like to move on to a case study. Actually, Ty is going to talk about the LA Kings, which is a great customer of ours.
Yeah, the LA Kings hockey team has been integrated with Dternity for almost a year now, and they've really found a lot of great success working with it. So a little background on what they do. The LA Kings production team is responsible for all the video content that the team generates. That includes video from the games. That includes stuff that they put on the Jumbotron at the Staples Center, and all the way down to their website, to their social media. All of that content is created by the LA Kings. And they're creating around 35 terabytes of new data a season with no signs of slowing. And it's really funny because they've come a long way. In 2008, they were only generating around 1 terabyte a year. So they've really been scaling up the amount of content that they've been creating. So when they were looking for a long-term solution for their archiving needs, they needed something that would scale to meet their content creation, and that would also integrate with their complicated video workflows like Avid and Adobe and Final Cut Pro and professional editing and special effects software programs like Shake, while also reducing the enormous man-hours spent on storage management. Before Dternity, the LA Kings were utilizing just a couple of tape drives, and they were moving their files to it one at a time in this almost conveyor belt style of data storage. And the essential part to understand about the LA Kings is that the people that use Dternity in their organization are not IT professionals. They are not trained on data storage technologies. They have not really worked with them in the past. These is a group of directors and film producers, production designers, and graphic artists that don't really have a formalized education for this kind of thing. And so we're really proud of the fact that we delivered the Dternity to them on a Friday afternoon around 3 o'clock. And their entire staff was up, trained, and running and migrating data to Dternity within 15 minutes. And we feel that really speaks to the ease of use that they required. After all, these are content generators, not content managers. And this gave them the opportunity and freedom to not have to worry about moving their data into an archive and focus on creating more stuff for the Los Angeles Kings. In addition to that headache solving, they've reduced their CapEx and OpEx by simplifying their systems, by not having a jerry-rigged kind of system that utilizes different programs, software, and hardware, and having to manage that from a higher end, while also leveraging that cost-effective media tape. And they also have been sending their data into the cloud for data protection and multi-site, multi-copy functionality so that in the event of disaster, they're always covered 24/7. And so in conclusion, we talk about the LA Kings last because they really use this Dternity solution the way it was intended and designed for, as a truly holistic solution that encompasses the three major tenets of what we're doing here, which is our archive media, which we have been innovating for over 2 decades, on-site NAS storage that features built-in data protection, and online vaulting with 24/7 portal access to ensure that you have access to your data when you need it all the time.
Well, thanks for that, guys. I wanted to ask and double-click a little bit about the Dternity NAS on the tape tier. Are you guys using different OEM, equipment there, and you just have a layer on top of it, and you sell it as a complete solution?
Yes, that's a correct understanding. The Dternity NAS is a NAS head, if you will, and it is designed to be compatible with any number of tape libraries out there, from the smaller 24-slot ones to a Spectralogic Tfinity or an IBM TS3500.
So I understand this correctly, then your NAS technology is not reliant on a single provider for the tape tier, is it?
That's correct. Yeah, Fujifilm, we're really not in the library business, but we are we are willing to add a brain on top of the library. So
yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that customer engagement, because I would imagine with your media that a lot of these places were already your customers, but here you're coming to them with a much more sophisticated way to do their storage.
Yeah, it depends on. So it's an interesting question. And the verticals, or I guess the workflows that can make immediate use of this type of solution are ones that have really where the content is their business. Okay, and so by that we mean production companies, otherwise media and entertainment, medical, right? All of those digital X-rays and stuff, that's their business. You get into engineering firms, anyone with a project-based workflow. Archiving can be quite a chore for your standard IT. Let's say the folks here below us that work in IT here at Fuji, they have a jumble of user directories with just randomness going on, right? And maybe they're archiving because of compliance or the lawyers told them to, right? But if you were to go into some of the file-based workflow, a project-based workflow, they could literally go right into a directory, right? And they could, like if they were an advertising agency, drill down to the clients folder, go to Procter & Gamble, look at project A, B, and C, and know, hey, I need to preserve this content, right? And that's actually why we have this file-based workflow, because that is the nature of everything that they have that they're managing, and they just simply want to move that over to another tier that's going to protect it at this, very economic fashion, without giving up the accessibility.
And what about having this media cloud? Sounds like a terrific sense of security. But what about getting those files back out of the cloud when they're like video, like my Avid system, and it's multi-terabytes that I have to bring back?
So a big bottleneck, especially when using a cloud service over time, if you do need to take a big chunk back, I think, and I know what you're getting at. That may be impossible depending on the amount of bandwidth that you have, and that's usually a choke point, of course. That's why Ty mentioned that this is a holistic approach. So, for example, the LA Kings, which would have very large files for their video content, that's why they use a blend of on-site storage and off-site. So for those customers that would have that kind of bandwidth or issue, having an affordable on-site layer there, a level at their disposal, allows them to move content, to ingest and to egress content very quickly. Also, even if they had just completely maybe they even ingested it on-site, and let's say that they have migrated it all completely over to our media cloud, we still have the ability, because the content that is sent to the media cloud, the file content, ends up on unique cartridges, unique to the customers. We are not mixing content between customers on cartridges. So really, if there is a scenario where someone needs an entire, movie, which is at this point, could be, several tens and tens of terabytes, we could actually just unlock those tapes and send them off to them, and then they can physically ingest them right on their end there. And you're not going to be able to do that over the wire.
Right. So FedEx is the highest bandwidth solution.
Yeah. Look, there are some companies out there.
Yeah.
FedEx is definitely. There are some companies out there that have tons and tons of these 10 gigabit connections, but I'd say that they're the exception to the rule, of course, right?
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, guys, I did want to ask you about the cost effectiveness piece of this, right? Because tape has that advantage typically with a really affordable price per gigabyte, and with your device there, are you able to deliver kind of the performance that somebody might need to bring those files back and use them in a workflow and make it kind of seamless?
Definitely. That is, so on the Dternity NAS side, there are different configurations to support, basically comes again down to ingest, right, and the amount of content how much data are you putting in to the system, and how much data do you need to take out? Like any other, at some point the controller, right, of any system becomes a bottleneck, right? So that kind of, the processing and the controller side of things needs to be architected and sized correctly. We have 3 different versions of the Dternity NAS, and so we're able to, in tangent with the customer, based on their ingest requirements, architect and provide the correct appliance that will support that for them. But that's the goal. The goal is again to put tape into this environment that's file-based, drag and drop, and it's on the network. Network means you have multiple users too. So this isn't, tape usually, right, was tied to a server. You'd have a server that would write to tape and stream to a specific tape drive, right? This is a totally different environment, and the technology is being leveraged in a completely new way, and it's actually really the majority of all environments is this, LAN multi-user environment. So it's really a big deal because, like you were just hinting on, now you're able to play with those economies around tape and put them in totally different environments. Really neat.
Very nice. Well, this is very exciting, and I want to thank you both for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on the world of big data.